Okay. So I thought maybe I could start this morning by playing some Bach for you. This piece by Bach is his prelude in E minor, but there has been a newer version made in the 19th century of this piece by Alexander Zilotti. Alexander Zilotti was, as you probably know, was one of Liszt's most famous students and would eventually become the teacher of Rachmaninoff. Alexander Zilotti made this version of the piece. He transposed it from the key of E minor to the key of B minor, and so the piece is now called Prelude in B minor. It's originally by Bach, arranged by Alexander Zilotti. Thank you very much. I've been playing that piece a little bit this season, and I find it's a very beautiful opening to a program. But I also find that it's a very beautiful encore. And so I'm always going back and forth, where should I put it on the program? Anyway, that's Bach's Prelude in B minor, arranged by Alexander Zilotti. Okay, now today's presentation is about the learning process. And you are all piano teachers and pianists, and so I'm expecting that you already know a great deal about the learning process, given that you've been teaching for many years. If you have anything that you would like to add to what I'm saying, please feel free to do so. And when you do add things to my discussion, I'm going to write them down. So when Chrissy comes, can I get a pencil? Is that possible?
Pencil? Okay.
Oh gosh, but you probably want to write too, yeah? Okay, good. See, because I want to get information from you too today. So more handouts will come. But let me give you an overview about our discussion today. I've been at Sacramento State teaching at this university for 20 years now. And before that, I was at Juilliard teaching, and as a teaching fellow, by the way. And when I arrived in California, I was so impressed with the caliber of talent, you know? And I attribute that to, of course, good teaching and good parenting. But I also noticed that there were some problems with the students, sort of on average. And one of the biggest problems that I've noticed, and I still notice this, is that there seems to be a lack of a systematic approach to learning. Okay, what do I mean by that? What I mean is basically students come to my university without a very good idea on how to approach learning a piece. And you know, the teaching can be quite good, but if the student is confused about what to do first and what to do second and you know what the goals are, then it makes it complicated. And especially, this is especially true, I find, in the higher education where I'm at. And so I want to kind of talk today about putting maybe a system in place for the younger students to get them on a track that has them thinking what the process is, how to approach a piece of music, what the goals are, short term and long term, to get themselves sort of in a mindset that will produce good results for the years to come. So that when I get the students at the university, they already have this system of learning in place. Now, I've sort of designed this step-by-step system, if you will, over the last few years, because I've just felt a little bit like, oh my gosh, I've got to do something to get the students sort of on track. So, when I discuss this with you today, I realize that not every issue will be covered. There will be things that I'm sure I haven't thought of. But hopefully there will be things here that you haven't thought of, that maybe it will be a good discussion to share information. So, okay, now, my idea is basically learning a piece of music can take 4 distinct steps. But within each step, there is a lot to do. Okay? So, let's talk about step 1, excuse me. The first part of the process is that the teacher needs to select repertoire that is appropriate for the student. Okay? Now I have to tell you a little story. And this is what made me put that first, right here. I have an acquaintance who was teaching a Beethoven sonata to a student, okay? And the Beethoven sonata in question was the Hammerklavier, Opus 106. And of course, I don't need to tell you, Opus 106 is the hardest of all Beethoven's sonatas, the Hammerklavier, and it's quite possibly one of the hardest pieces ever written for the piano, okay? All right, so after I heard the student play, I said to the student, you know, you're doing a good job. It was just the first movement, by the way. Okay. Not the few. So I said, oh, you're doing a good job. How long have you had the piece? Well, I've had the piece for about 6 months. I said, okay, that's kind of a long time. Okay, all right. What other Beethoven sonatas have you learned? You knew I was going to ask this question, didn't you? Yeah, okay. Because you probably all have asked these questions too.
Right.
What other Beethoven sonatas have you learned? And you can guess what the answer was. This is my first Beethoven sonata. Oh my God. I said, oh no. I didn't really say that. That's what I thought. You know, I'm telling you and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe that this was the first Beethoven. So, choosing appropriate repertoire is essential. I love Clementi's idea of gratis ad parnassum. Steps to greatness. Step by step. Okay? And you use pieces in the beginning, of course, Kabalevsky children's pieces, Bartók children's pieces, Khachaturian children's pieces, and on a Schumann album for the young, Tchaikovsky album for the young, even American composers like Robert Starr. And I know that there are thousands of wonderful Chinese composers and pieces that are suitable for young people. And there's about 1 million other composers out there, I kid you not, who are writing really terrible music that probably should be avoided. Okay, enough about that. Let's just say that when you have a student who is ready to play a Beethoven sonata, Opus 49, number 1, Opus 49, number 2, Opus 2, number 1. These are really good ones to start with. Yes, okay. So, all right. Choosing repertoire that is appropriate for the student will give the student what they need all along the way on their journey that can last 10 years or 12 years with you as their teacher. Okay. Now, listening to recordings. I know that everybody has an opinion about this. Some people say, well, you shouldn't listen to recordings because you need to form your own opinions and you need to form your own interpretation. And I believe that partly that is true. But I also believe that it's very healthy for young children and college-age students as well to listen to the recordings of the great pianists. Not just the great pianists, but the great violinists and the great singers and the great orchestras, the great chamber ensembles, quartets, etc. To give them a broader understanding of what is in their world of music. Okay, so you give the student Beethoven Opus 2, number 1, and you say, gee, there are a few really good recordings of this piece that I think you should listen to, just to get you started. Just to get you started. Not so that you will copy the recording, because, by the way, I don't really believe that that's possible. I mean, you know, you have Rudolf Serkin playing Opus 2, number 1, and then you tell a 12-year-old child to listen to that recording. I don't think they're going to ever sound like Rudolf Serkin, you know, because they're not that good yet, usually. So you tell them, listen to some recordings by the great pianists to get a sense of what is possible. By the way, I have my students at the university listen to recordings also to get a sense of what is not possible. You see what I mean? Sometimes you hear a recording, okay, like, you know, maybe some funny recording, I'm not going to name names, but, you know, a recording by so-and-so that you know you don't like. You go, oh, this is just not a good recording, but this one I like. But maybe you tell the student to listen to both, because they can also form their opinion You know, you don't have to tell them which one is good and which one's not yet, but let them form their opinions and let them decide, hey, this one is doing some really strange things and I don't like that. And it builds their knowledge base to decide what they don't like too. Okay, but it gets them started, all right? Now, all of this that I'm talking about right now is within the first step of learning a piece. And you'll see as we go on how I've constructed this in just a moment. It'll come very clear to you in a moment.
I have a
So,
question.
yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
So you said, so you should listen the piece. You think that the kids listen the piece before they start to practice, or you? For me, I told my students that don't listen until you know how to play it.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Wow. Okay. You know, I don't doubt that that has its merits, but I kind of think that some students do better to listen early, some students do better to listen later. And you know, you just have to kind of find the individual's needs. But I admire that because it makes the student really think, doesn't it?
Yeah, I want them to think that, because I don't want to depend on the hearing. They have to use the brain first.
That's right, that's
then
right.
They use ear.
I agree with that, by the way. Also, the reading has to take place. And if they're just using their ears, then that can lead to problems down the road, you know. So I think that the reading and learning to decipher, learning to decode the score comes from the eyes and the brain, not the ears quite as much. So I think there's merits to your method too. I think though that along those lines, fingerings, smart fingerings are something that you need to help the student with. And that needs to take place right at the very beginning of the process. They need to know what the good fingerings are, and you know, don't let students use bad fingerings. Don't let them do it. Just say, no, and write it in. Write it in early. I remember talking to Alicia de la Rocha, the great pianist who passed away a few years ago, the great Spanish pianist. And she told me, she said, the first thing I do when I learn a piece of music is write in the fingerings. Because it makes for a much more efficient process. You waste less time when you have the fingerings there. But if you have to kind of decide your fingerings every day, you come to the piece to practice and you go, what was my fingering yesterday? I can't remember. And then you take 5 minutes to figure it out again. And it wastes time. So help your students with the fingerings early on and give them good, solid, traditional fingerings when appropriate. Rachmaninoff, by the way, sometimes uses really different fingerings, and so does Prokofiev. And so, you know, sometimes you want to think a little bit more creatively there. But when you're talking about Mozart and Chopin, you want to give traditional fingerings and to lay the foundation for the future, okay? Also, along those lines of not listening to recordings, looking at the score and analyzing the score with the student is very, very important. This is all part of the first step of learning. You say, this piece is in the key of G major. Look at the key signature. Look at the end of the piece. Confirm that it's in the key of G major. And look for accidentals that might cause modulation. Talk about the form of the piece. This piece is in sonata form. This is the exposition, this is the development, this is the recapitulation. Or maybe it's not sonata form, maybe it's binary form, or maybe it's ternary form. It's important that the student know what they're getting into when they start to learn a piece. Because if you don't help them know what the structure is, they may look at that piece like, oh, this is such a big piece, you know, it's like, oh, it goes on forever. It goes, you know, it's 1,000,000 pages. But of course it isn't, it's just 2 sections. You just say, this is the A section, and this is the B section, and we're going to start with the A section, or however you like to start. That's a rough analysis. That's not getting into the harmonic analysis. That's just a broader analysis of the piece. break it into smaller sections than even what the structure might first demonstrate. If it's sonata form, that's going to be three pretty large sections. And of course, you want to break it down into smaller sections by saying, look at this. This is the first theme, and this is the second theme. You could even break the first theme into 2 parts, or 3 parts, or 4 parts. Say, this is the beginning of the theme. This is the middle of the theme. And it helps them to start to digest it. So sectionalizing on a smaller basis than just the form itself can be really helpful. I do this with my college students, so I can't help but to think that it's helpful for the younger students too. Okay, you can go even deeper into understanding groupings, like for instance Alberti base figures. You can block those for the students, you know this. And you can say, look, this is just a G major chord, but it's arpeggiated, or it has this pattern. And that kind of idea prevails throughout the left hand in this first section. You can see, and then they say, oh, yeah, that's just a chord. Or it's just 2 chords, just tonic, subdominant, back to tonic. Oh, yeah, it's just 2 chords. So it makes it easier for the student if you show them how to look at patterns and show them how to see groupings. I tell my students at the university, the notes on the page are kind of like the letters of the words, like as if you were, reading a poem, let's say. And you don't want to get stuck on every letter as you read, what's a poem? What is a beautiful poem? Roses are red, violet. Can you imagine? Roses are red, violets are blue. So if you get stuck on the letters and you don't see the words, you don't see the chords or the themes, the melodies themselves, and the patterns, then it can be very difficult to manage. So groupings are important. All right, that comes now to the next part. Slow practice and metronome practice. Of course, I know I'm preaching to the choir here when I talk about slow practice and metronome practice. I know you all believe that slow practice is important. It's just that the students don't believe it, right? Yeah. So I want to ask some questions of you now. How do you tell your students that they need to practice slowly? How do you say it to them? Do you go like this? Do you go, you need to practice slowly? Or do you say, we need to have a little talk over here? How do you do it? Does anybody want to share some ideas? Yes?
I will put out one of my keys that I'm working on. I say, even me as a teacher, I practice slow. So I demonstrate how slow I did. Like, maybe I just did half of the measure. And I show them, this is how I achieve this kind of music. It is impossible just do at the tempo. So
right.
Even me as a teacher, so you are a student, you have to do slowly.
Yes, thank you. That's brilliant. It's absolutely right. So you use yourself as the example. I do that too. Any other ideas? What about metronome? Because that's slightly different, than just slow practice. Metronome seems like, oh my gosh, it's like taking medicine almost for kids. And they feel like, they have to be so strict. Yes?
I give them number of the metronome that I require, but I will not give them like a quarter note equal to 100 or something. I give them like half note equal to 100. All right, and then they have to count as eighth note or even 16th note.
Makes them understand rhythm and counting. That's very good. That's very good. Do you prescribe these ideas in sections, or
Yeah,
yes?
I explain to them in the beginning why I want you to do that. So this one's equal to like the other eighth is equal to 3 portion of that. So they count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
Like that. So they have to be slow.
Very good.
Otherwise they cannot match.
With the structure of
With the
metronome.
metronome.
Did you want to say something? Yes? Okay, I thought I saw a hand. Okay, but feel free. feel free, if you have anything to add, or by the way, if you disagree with anything, just say, no, that doesn't work, and I can prove it. But the metronome practice is so important, in my opinion, not because I want the students to sound like metronomes, and not because I want them to be rigid, but it does help to develop a sense of steadiness, of course. But even beyond that, what it does is it helps the student look ahead. If they know they have to stay with the metronome, they look ahead in the music further. It's like driving in the car, you have to look further, and when the metronome goes a little faster and the gas pedal goes a little further down, you have to look further ahead on the freeway to make sure everything's clear, And so it causes the processing in the brain to speed up when the metronome comes on. And I think that that's a healthy thing to have happen. It's sort of like exercising the brain muscle in a different way. So now let me read to you the summary of step 1. You have it before you. Yes.
Can you stand this side because?
Oh yeah.
You know why? Because if you stand this side, we cannot see your face.
Yeah.
Oh, now it's better.
We just see the black.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I
Smart.
didn't realize. Is this better?
Smart. Yeah, it's better.
Okay. So thank you for telling
上
me
次
that.
你那边有个灯，
I can see all of you perfectly. Actually. I have no idea. So now at the end of each section, I'm going to read a synopsis of the step. To achieve step 1 in the process of learning a piece, the student needs to be able to play through the piece at a medium tempo with the metronome in a steady tempo, yes, with fluidity and with no stumbling. And I tell my students, our goal in the next week, or maybe 2 weeks, or maybe 3 weeks, is to achieve step 1. Step 1. And then they go, that's step 1. And then I tell them, this is step 1, and this is how you do it. All the things that we just talked about. And of course, it takes a different amount of time with different students. Some students take longer than others, okay. But you try to give them the goal. Step 1 is achieved when a student can play through a piece at a medium tempo. It doesn't have to be up to tempo, but at a medium tempo with the metronome, with fluidity and no stumbling. Okay, now, I have students who stumble. Who has students who stumble?
No.
Yes, of course. Okay, so if you follow all of that stuff that we just talked about, chances are better that the student will develop the ability to play without stumbles. The metronome will help, and slow practice will help, and trying to keep them from playing fast will help. So that's why I say step 1 involves the medium tempo. The medium tempo, all right? Okay, let's go on now to step 2. That's why I drew a line there. Step 2 is the next section. After you've achieved step 1, you can, it's like, the game of Monopoly. Only pass go after, only collect $200 after you pass go, all right? Don't go on to step 2 until step 1 is solid. And students don't understand this because they want to memorize a piece the first day. They're like, it's all about memorizing. Everything is all about memory. No. You have to lay the foundation first. And then step 2 involves memory. So here we go. Working with the metronome, you increase the tempo very gradually. And of course, these days we have those digital metronomes and you can go one tick at a time. I mean, one increment at a time. In the old days, when I was a student, you had to go 3, 4, 6, at a time, and so you would make these big jumps. Now, it's better than ever. All right, now, we're going to talk about memory. You begin memorizing in sections. Give them sections. Tell them what the sections are. Draw lines in the music so that they know what section 1 is, section 2, section 3. So they don't look at it like a gigantic piece that they can't tackle. So say, okay, this week we're going to memorize 3 sections. Now let's talk about musical memory. A lot of people think, well, musical memory is, muscle memory, and that's it. Of course, you guys know that's not true. But the students don't know that. So we have to teach the students that the memory comprises 4 different compartments. And if you have a 5th one, I want you to tell me about it, because I've thought about this for a long time. The first is the oral memory. Students, that's the one that students usually catch first. They go, oh yeah, da 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 da, da 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 da. Oh yeah, that's oral memory. I remember that from when I was a baby. When they hear, Peter and the Wolf, they go, oh, I love that melody. And what is that? They don't know what it is, but they hear it and they love it. So oral is the hearing is a very, very strong force in memory. The visual is almost as strong, and it can be as strong if you develop it. I like to use the word photographic when I'm talking with my students about memory. You need to look at the music every day. I say every day with a capital E. Every day. Because the first thing they want to do is they want to close the book and play from ear. They want to use their ear. So I say, no. Use the book every day, until the day after the concert. That's my famous saying, until the day after the concert. Read slowly, go slow, and look at every note every day. And go back into your analysis mode when you're using your eyes. Remember, oh yes, this is the A section, this is the B section, and we'll get to the analytic in just a minute. The tactile memory, that is the muscle memory, is the 3rd compartment of memory. This is also extremely strong. We all know that, right? Students can play without even knowing what they're playing. They can play a piece of music, and it's so strange to me. But it's a wonderful thing, because, if you're asked to play in Carnegie Hall, you better know the notes, and you better be able to play it in your sleep, so that, if somebody sneezes on the front row, it doesn't throw you off. So you've got to be able to play from muscle memory. If you're playing Chopin double thirds etude, or if you're playing Faux Follet of Liszt, Transcendental Etude, and you don't have any muscle memory, you'll never learn it, because it's just too much for the brain to be thinking about every note. Okay, so we all know that. Building muscle memory comes early on when you teach technique, scales, and Hanon, and Czerny, cadence patterns even. Of course, that's analytic too, but the fingers go where they're supposed to go if you teach it early on. Arpeggios, trills, double thirds, those things are all important to develop the muscle memory part of the brain. Okay, and then there's the analytic part of memory. And students need to know, when they're playing in the key of G, they need to know, I'm in the key of G. And the cadence is coming now. And the cadence is dominant 7 to tonic. And I'm in root position here. They need to know those kinds of things in order to if something happens to their muscle memory, they can go, I'm in the key of G, boom. Now, I had a student, this is a little story. I had a student who was playing Schubert E-flat piano trio, okay? Piano trio in E-flat. She has the music in front of her. This is where I really started to think. She gets to the end of the piece with her violinist and her cellist, and they're playing. And she has a little brain freeze, and she doesn't know where she's at on the last line. And so what does she do? To finish the piece, she plays an E major chord. And the violinist and the cellist play E flat.
Oh my God.
Oh,
I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. So, I asked a question. I said, what key are you in? Piano trio in E flat. What key are you in? She was just like, I said, oh my God, you don't know what key you're in. So of course, she didn't know what the last chord of the piece was. So this is important, that the analytic part of the brain be engaged when you're memorizing a piece of music. Oh my goodness. All right? She learned that real fast. Okay, so now, practicing in sections is going to inform all of those memory compartments. Practicing in sections is really, really important. Now, listen to this. Nelita True. Nelita True is a very famous piano teacher. She teaches at Eastman. And she taught her students, and therefore by association, I know a lot of her students. And they taught me that she says you need to practice in sections from the end of the piece. From the end of the piece. You take the last phrase and you do it 5 times in a row. And then you take the second to the last phrase and you do it 5 times in a row, and then you link them together. And then you take the third to the last, and you back your way through the piece. And what does that do? It develops starting points. So that if something happens, you can jump to the next starting point. And every piece needs to have lots of starting points. Points at which the student can begin from memory, and you need to test them on that. Not in a cruel way, of course, but you need to say, hey, can you start right there? This is my favorite section, start there. And then they go, can I start at the beginning? No. No. So this is my point. You get them into the pattern of having many starting points, and you help them decide what those starting points are. They won't develop them though unless you have them practice from the end of the piece, because it's too easy to not stop when you're going from beginning to end. You just keep going, oh, I'll do it next time. I'll do it next time. I'll do it next time. And you just keep going through the piece again and again and again, and then you don't have starting points. So if you teach them early on to go from the end of the piece to the front of the piece, they will learn that faster, and they'll use it for the rest of their lives. Okay. Studying the score away from the piano. Who does this? I'm sure that there are people in this room who do that. Yes, I learn my repertoire mostly at the piano, but every day I'm working away from the piano, thinking through, what does my piece sound like in my imagination? And, okay, I'm starting in the key of G, and I modulate to the key of E, whatever. You have to know where you're going. You have to see the roadmap of the piece in your mind without the help of the muscle memory, without the keys in front of you. And in fact, Robert Spillman says, aside from studying away from the piano, he says, close the fallboard and have the students play through the first part of their piece like this, like this. And then have them do it, and then have them do it again this way. Just to see if they can think, what am I doing? What's the rhythm? Okay, name this piece. Can anybody name this piece? You guys are good. That's right. Pat the T. But if they don't know the rhythm, you know how the rhythm is difficult in the pat the T in the beginning. If they don't know the rhythm, it'll be very apparent right there on that fallboard. Ba 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 ba. They'll be ba 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 ba. So it's a good little thing to get them thinking without the aid of the keys, you see? And without the muscle memory, they have to think, what's that rhythm, you know? So working away from the piano, and that's sort of in that vein, can be really helpful, and I would do it with my students regularly. Okay, and you all know about lots of slow practice, and I already said you must look at the score every day. Looking at the score every day with a capital E. Every day with a capital E. Okay, now the last one here on my list is really fun. To play, once the student can play the piece without stumbling, and then the metronome work that gets them faster and faster has been done, eventually it's fun to have them play a piece faster than it should be played, you know? And, you know, some pieces are already super fast, like, you know, double thirds etude, let's say, or something like that. Oh, it's really difficult to play faster than what you want to play because it's just really difficult. But some pieces are not that difficult to play faster than they should be played. Let me demonstrate a little bit. Something like, let me just think for a minute. Okay, a Brahms intermezzo, right? Right? Have your student do this in sections like this. Stop. Do it again. You know, okay, why would I have a student do that? I do it myself, by the way, but what's the value of that? If your student is the kind of person who wants to play everything fast, then it's probably not the best way to do it. But if you have a student who has trouble with memory, and like they can't think fast enough, this is really good. This is why I do it, because I want to make sure that I can think really fast when I'm playing. Of course I'm not going to perform it like that, but I practice it like that so that I know where I'm going. It speeds the thinking process up. My teacher also had a theory, Thomas Schumacher. He used to say, when you practice a piece faster than it needs to go, you develop the bird's eye view of the piece. See? It's the overview of the piece from a distance. It's like when you're flying in an airplane and you look down and you see all those farms down there and you go, oh yeah, they're all so compact, you know? They're all right there. Well, the piece, in a sense, shrinks down when you play faster. And so it can be helpful for students who have a propensity to not think so fast. Okay? I fall into that category. All right, so let's do a synopsis now of step 2. Step 2 is achieved only when a student can play a piece from memory, roughly at tempo, with no stumbling. So step 2 really is about memorizing. And step 2 should not be undertaken before step 1. That's why it's called step 2. Okay? Now, does anybody have any comments about this so far, or any disagreements? Like, no, I think you're completely crazy. You think I'm crazy? You raised your hand.
I just have another, I think it's very helpful way to help my student to memorize a piece,
Yes.
which that my teacher told me.
Yeah.
And I actually asked them to, for example, play writing on the actual key, left hand on the top of the piano.
Oh, yes.
And or left hand and right hand. And it's funny to know, like, most of the students can play left hand on the piano but right hand on board, right? Because we hear our right hand melody mostly. But when you play right hand on the keys and left hand without any sounding, they have hard time to find out what was the chord and what's the position.
That is true. That is very true. Thank you for that. It reminds me also of what Liszt used to tell his students. Liszt would say, play the piece through once with the right hand louder than the left hand, and then play it again with the left hand louder. And he would even go so far in a fugue, play it once with the soprano voice loud, and then play it again with the bass voice loud, And that you get a sense of what the voices are doing or what the hands are doing. It's an excellent way to do it. So miming, I wrote that down. Thank you. I'm going to use that. Yes.
I don't know, did you mention about the photo memory?
Photographic, yes. The visual,
You do mention,
the visual
okay.
memory.
Okay.
Yes. That sort of goes hand in hand with the analytic. But you know, if the student stops looking at the book, their ear will start to take over, and their muscles will start to take over. And unless they have true photographic memory and they can really see it, those other memories will start to become stronger while the memory of the visual gets weaker. So I tell them, look at the book every day. Look at the music every day. Go slow and look at every note. Go slow. And of course, we all know students hate to go slow, but I'm speaking very idealistically. Okay. Now, step 3 is the most interesting step, I think, because it involves interpretation. And it's a very concise explanation. Now we work on interpretation through various research. Reading, listening, live concerts, lessons, and discussions with teacher and peers, and experimentation of ideas. Well, I'll tell you what, if we all had YouTube when we were growing up, you know, what a thing they have these days. These kids today, they have YouTube, and they have, like, you know, iTunes and Classical Library Online, and they have all these, IMSLP, my goodness, you know, they have all these resources. Everybody knows about these resources I'm just mentioning, yeah? If you don't, raise your hand and I'll explain more carefully. But nowadays, the student can feel like they're in charge of their research even more than when we were students. When we were students, we would, you know, we were lucky if our teacher played a record for us. You know, and then if maybe your parents had another record, and then you go, oh, can you listen to that? Or maybe your dad would say, sit down and listen, and you go, no, I'd rather go out and play basketball. You know, so this is like, but now kids, they love to be on the computer. So it's a match made in heaven. YouTube, click. I tell my students, don't listen to the little kids in their living room on YouTube. You know? And they go, yeah. Sure. I say, listen to the really famous pianists. And then they look at me with a blank eye and they say, who are they? Oh, I forget. You don't know everything yet. So then I write down, like, listen to Horowitz, listen to Glenn Gould, listen to Alicia De La Rocha, Angela Hewitt, Lang Lang, of course, you know. I mean, listen to the great pianists. But don't waste your time with these little kids in their living room.
Digital piano, keyboard.
Yeah, oh, it's not even a real piano. I know, it drives me crazy. So, but step 3, you know, the art of interpretation is the most powerful and the most interesting part of what we do as artists, because that is what sustains us for a lifetime in music, is our ability to interpret and to love the music that we play. Because, by the way, I know I don't need to say this, but the students need to know that it's not just about playing the right notes.
Yeah.
It's not about being digitally correct. It's not about, like, showing the judge that you can play it perfectly. It has to be about something bigger than that. It has to be about not just, like, making music, but making music on your terms, you know, so that you end up loving what you're saying. You see? If you end up regurgitating, you know, like, you know, of course when you're young, the teacher helps you with interpretation. You say, you know, make sure the 2-note slur sounds like this, and make sure those staccatos are crisp, or make sure those staccatos are not crisp, depending on the composer, you know, depending on the style. So the teacher helps, but in the end, it's all about this process of learning how to decode the music, decode the notes, decipher the notes, so that in the end, in the long term, the student can do it for themselves, and then decide things that make them feel happy, and that make them feel like they're speaking the truth through the music. When you play a Beethoven sonata, you don't want to sound like I don't know, you don't want to sound like, you're copying Rudolf Serkin or Claudio Arrau or Angela Hewitt or whomever. You want to be able to have your own interpretation, and to teach the students how to decode the music early on is what gets them on the path. Now, I will say this. The interpretation process really takes place throughout step 1 and step 2 as well. Because you can't sit at the piano and plunk through the notes without thinking about what it sounds like. Like, oh, well, maybe what's it going to sound like when it goes faster? And you start dreaming about, the day when you can play it. You can't stop that process. So I like to think that step 3, the interpretive step, pervades all the steps. But it is at its most powerful once the memory is in place and once the student can play without stumbling, etc., etc. So that's why I placed interpretation into the step 3 category. See? Okay. Now, step 4. This is the one that even my college students rebel against. They don't want to play in class. We have repertoire class, which is our studio class, every Monday. And we get the recital hall at the university. We have 9-foot Steinways up on the stage, and we have a big auditorium. And my piano majors and I gather every Monday at 2 o'clock. And the first question I say is, who would like to play today? Raise your hand so that I can kind of calculate the timing of it all while I start to give a lecture on such and such. Oh, you're going to play Debussy? Let's talk about Debussy. It's his 150th year this year, Okay, what piece are you going to play? But I'll tell you what, most of the students, they don't want to raise their hand. They don't want to play because they're nervous. Clearly, we all remember those times too. And so, we try to make a good environment and a comfortable environment for the students so that there's a little bit of humor and there's some storytelling, and then you go, oh, how's that coming? And you want to try it out for the first time. After, all that work you give to the student, you don't want to try it out. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. My goodness, whatever that means, perfect. Let's just try it. The first time is the first time. The first time is hard for everybody. But you need, and I tell the students, you need to work this piece out. You have to work it out. You have to play it in front of people. And it could be your little kitty cat first, and then your little sister second, and then maybe your parents third, and then maybe the neighbor's dog, But you gotta start somewhere. And so I say play for little groups of your friends to start to work the piece out. Now, eventually you start to play in front of bigger crowds. And that's the repertoire class at the university. We have, 16 or 17 students, and they're all piano majors. And that's a pretty tough crowd. But we try not to be critical. We try to be really supportive. We say, oh, that sounds really good. And we clap and whistle and hoop and holler and say, oh, bravo, bravo. And then the student goes after the class into the practice room and practices the piece again. And tries to remember what they forgot. Or, if there was a mishap, they go, oh, that's the darn chord I missed. And they practice it a lot. And then the next week I say, would you like to play that piece again? No. Try it, try it. It's going to be easier the second time. And it'll be easier the third time. It'll be even easier the fourth time. And by the time you get to Carnegie Hall, it's going to be really easy. You think Lang Lang plays in Carnegie Hall as his first concert? No, that's usually the last concert on the tour. Yeah? So you play in Boonesville, Iowa first. I hope nobody from Boonesville, Iowa. And then you go maybe to Des Moines, and then maybe you go to Omaha and some other towns, Tucson, and then eventually you think, maybe Santa Clara, San Jose. Maybe I'm ready, but Carnegie Hall is the last one on the stop, because you gotta work out the piece a lot before you get under big pressure, okay? So, what happens during the working out process, aside from what we just described of the piece gets easier to play, you actually become closer to the piece. You become more convinced of your